Black Myths podcast is an informative conversational show analyzing popular myths about Black culture of a socio-political nature.
Translation, we just debunking the bullshit that be said about Black people.
Hey y'all, while we're genuinely nerds and be doing this research for fun half the time, it does take a lot of work and effort, not only for us to be able to do this, but to also get people on the show to help bring this content to y'all. So to help us continue to bring you this important program, please consider becoming a Patreon, going to patreon.com/blackmyths. So you can feel free to just check out our show notes for further information.
Another state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told them be safe in the state.
Welcome to the Black Myths podcast. Welcome to the Black Myths podcast. I am your host, Too Black. It is just me today as the host. Today's myth is the Israel-Hamas War. I will get to why we chose that and why that is a myth. But first, want to address our patrons. Want to make sure to do this at the top of the episode. Again, we're trying to get to 100 patrons. So real quick, shout out to people who've joined. Tatiana Rebel, Derek B. Local Man, That Dude, and Maya, with the people who signed up over the last month, and and Danielle Young as well. So want to shout out all of you who signed up, and remember, this is for the Black Myths Patreon. If you want to sign up, please do that. Trying to get to 100. So glad to shout those people out. All right. Again, thank you for that. Now getting into today's myth, this was a challenging one to prepare for because normally you want to have more prep, but this is ongoing. For anyone who's paid any attention to the news, regardless of your opinion on it, you know that there's something happening in Israel, in Palestine. Now, what you've been given is a different conversation, but we'll get to that. So the myth is the Israel-Hamas War because it's framed as a war on Hamas by Israel and the rest of the West as Palestinians are collectively punished for the actions of Hamas. And when you look at the numbers of who's dying and what's going on and everything of that nature, this is clearly not a war that's just about Hamas. Like, that's bullshit. That doesn't actually frame what's happening. I saw a report right before I got on here from the New York Times, who's been doing a lot of propaganda for this war. Even they admitted only about 13 members of Hamas have been killed as of that report. So, but over 5,000 people, Palestinians, have been killed in Gaza. 18,000 have been wounded, and that is as of this recording. That will continue to rise, unfortunately. There have been 95 people killed in West Bank, where Hamas doesn't even exist, and about 1,700 people have been wounded. Meanwhile, there's been about 1,400. There's been about 1,400 Israelis have been killed, and about 5,000 and a half have been wounded. And again, we're not here to shrug off the loss of any human life, but the point of doing this myth is to provide serious context of how we got here, to go over the history, to go in depth on what arrived for these conditions to emerge, as opposed to getting into this hyper morality battle about who you condemn and who you don't condemn without having any proper assessment of what went down, right? So we're not interested in that here. That's for other shows to do. We're not doing that. But it's clear that this is not about just Hamas. And if you have any sense of the history of what Israel has done to the Palestinian people, that claim, under any real scrutiny, just doesn't hold up. And anybody trying to push up both sides on that just isn't being quite honest. And that's putting it nicely. So we have two guests today, Rana Nazzal Hamadeh and Musa Springer. Rana is a Palestinian artist and filmmaker living between Ramallah and Ottawa, an unceded Anishinaabe territory that is occupied Canada. Her photography, film, and installation works looks at issues related to time, space, land, and movement, offering interventions rooted in a decolonial framework. Her practice is deeply informed by knowledge emerging from the grassroots movements of justice around her, both in Palestine and across Turtle Island. So she is a Palestinian and has direct ties to people in Palestine, and provides great insight that reading books can't even quite do. So greatly appreciate her for coming on. And then we have Musa Springer. They are a cultural worker, community organizer, and independent researcher. They are a member of the Walter Rodney Foundation, host of the Groundings podcast, and also fairly new editor of Hood Communist. So those are going to be our two guests today who join us to ground this conversation, to help us really understand the history of the war. So the first episode is going to get more into the history of the occupation of apartheid in Israel and what happened to the Palestinian people. Then the second episode is going to deal more directly with what's happening right now, but we need to ground it in some history first. These episodes will not be as far apart as our normal ones are, just because of the immediacy of what's going on, and the sense of urgency that's needed. So this is going to come out, and then the next episode is going to come out 2 days after it. So be on the lookout. These will be pretty quick back to back. But since they're, we talk for over 2 hours, split it up still. So other than that, I'm going to read a monologue that's in response to, again, this urgency by the West to morally condemn, while it sends weapons to the country who is the main perpetuator of violence, the main perpetuator of oppression, in this particular situation, that being Israel, and does this all around the world, United States. But there's always this need for the oppressed people to condemn anything that people do in response to oppression. Now, this doesn't require people to agree with the strategy and tactics of Hamas or anyone else. It's just to be serious about the situation, and getting into a condemnation game does not help the Palestinian people. It honestly just creates more fodder for the United States and Israel to say that we're going to kill innocent people, as they openly admitted today. Like, the innocent people are going to have to die, and it just kind of is what it is.
Isn't going to happen. This is war. It is combat. It is bloody. It is ugly, and it's going to be messy. And innocent civilians are going to be hurt going forward. I wish I could tell you something different. I wish that wasn't going to happen, but it is going to happen.
So we're going to read this monologue, and then we're going to get into the interview. This is called "We Condemn Your Condemnation." I just recently published this last week. In a colony, condemnation is like the deformed blood of the lamb we begrudgingly paint on our doors, praying you, the colonizer, will distinguish us from the rest of the rebellious population you come to slaughter. Thus, to complete the ritual, when a plague of resistance occurs that bleeds outside of your blood-drawn colonial lines, you demand our condemnation. You insist we deplore the use of human shields when nothing exists behind them but more human beings whom you will bomb and sanction into oblivion, whether we choose to resist or not. You urge that we denounce the pig-provoked riots incinerating your plundering cities, claiming they undermine the cause as if we share one in common. You implore us to rebuke the terrorists and extremists who fume smoke from your crimson empire, because, of course, violence is never the answer. But how did you get here? Protesting peacefully? Yet after we proselytize ourselves before your patronizing demands, after we denounce, rebuke, deplore, castigate, censor, disavow, reject, repudiate, renounce, impugn, scold, disband, disown every resistant bone of our people, there remains nothing left to show for all the blood we smeared, but the same mark of death we kowtowed to avoid. You led us to believe that there was redemption in snitching on our own. Finally, after hunting down the rebellions through your police killings, mass lynchings, anti-indigenous hangings, child perishings, land thievings, and the church, mosque, school, and hospital bombings done to defend yourself from the beast you identify as us, you have the nerve to still expect that we pinch our pitch black souls and return with the humanity of forgiveness. Forgiveness is futile when humanity is a quality you have never possessed and are utterly incapable of forming. You could not grow a soul even if you purchased it with everything that you stole. So you need our self-mutilating condemnation to prove that we are just as morally bankrupt as you. Only then is the colonial process complete for you to rinse and repeat, but your thirst for our condemnation inevitably condemns your survival. We are done condemning ourselves. Instead, we have some questions for you. Do you denounce America standing on the side of Palestinian genocide? Does your support for an open-air prison not make you a global sponsor of terrorism? Does it not strip the people of Gaza of any modicum of honor? Do you believe in Africa's right to exist, or is colonialism a more efficient fix? What's your stance on gathering reparations for slave masters? At what cost were you in favor of Chase Bank laundering money for Nazis during the Holocaust? Is the Anti-Defamation League not a modern Zionist front? Do you denounce the United Nations spreading of cholera in Haiti and the raping of teenage girls by UN troops who abandoned them with babies? How about the theft of their earthquake relief funds? Is the Clinton Foundation not an extremist organization for imposing more poverty on their economy? Is the CIA not pure evil for their assassinations and coups? Why have you not condemned any of these motherfuckers yet? Mr. President, what will be done with all the refugee victims of capitalism? Despite all your enormous wealth, your streets are filled with homeless vets and tents. So does capitalism even work? Should there be a regime change in the U.S. since the police keep murdering their own people? Based on this logic, maybe the Middle East should invade to enslave Black America then. My sources say that people want you to withdraw. Frankly, why are you still here? We thought you said you were leaving. We are not interested in your polluted answers because we already smell the stench of your lies. We know you will set loose your neo-colonial puppets who delusionally believe they are free to condemn us to death with the nuance of both sides, but we no longer fuck with them either. There is no moral high ground in upholding a colony. Just like your sheepdogs, your false morality is a counterinsurgent distraction to corral us against the liberation that we seek. If we condemn anything, we condemn the precious time we wasted arguing with you as if your mind was subject to change, as if some progress could be obtained by appearing redeemable in the banality of your eyes. Moving forward, any flaws and imperfections we possess or wrongs or transgressions that we commit shall be judged and addressed by only us. No press releases, organizational statements, rallies for prayers, or calls for world peace will be forwarded to you. You are blocked, and your position is irrelevant to our goals. We want everything back with interest. Call it socialism, call it communism, or just call it your end. We condemn your condemnation. We are done. Signed, the colonized. Because certainly what we need right now is another statement. All right. As you heard in the introduction, the myth that this is an Israeli or Israel-Hamas war just doesn't get to the heart of what's going on at all. So I told you all about the two guests that we have on today. So before we get into like any deeper history or any deeper analysis of what has happened or what is currently happening or what even should happen, I just want to get y'all takes on like everything that's going on, because I know it's a lot. Even preparing for this it's been more difficult than the average show because it's like currently happening. It's not, and it's at a peak that it hasn't been, or maybe never has been, you know. So I want to just get either one of you can go first just to respond to your feelings about it, you know, and what kind of how you see things going right now.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for introducing. Um, yeah, I think for Palestinians around the world right now, we're kind of in a state of shock. And I don't say that lightly because no tactic really that we've seen in the last 2 weeks has been new. And none of it really began in the last 2 weeks. It's been part of this really long, drawn out process. But it's impossible to see what's happening and not be stunned and not feel with your people. And I think a lot of people who aren't Palestinian feel the same way. I think it's, for a lot of us, I'm in so-called Canada right now. I'm in a small city. We're about 1 million people. And I think in the Palestinian community just here, there's about 100 family members that have been killed in Gaza, of just people in this small Arab community. Every day we're seeing folks, Palestinians that we know from around the world, from inside Gaza and from outside of it, saying that they've lost. And what's really shocking is, I've lost 14 members of my family. And this is one phone call that they're getting. Entire families just being wiped off the map. It's unprecedented in like the speed and the scale. And also, I think the resistance is a bit unprecedented as well, for anything that we've seen in our lifetimes as people who are, I don't know your ages, but I'm in my 30s. So it's definitely a different time. And a lot of our focus right now is on getting to an end to Israeli shelling. And we're going to see there's so much more work to do after that. But this is like really the focus of a lot of the emergency mobilization right now.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Rana, because I can only imagine the shock that you describe and like the way it feels right now, being Palestinian and watching things unfold. Because I know for me, with not a drop of Palestinian or Arab blood, I watching like the videos online, almost being glued to reading updates every 10 minutes, or really just being, it's unavoidable. The reality that the genocide that's unfolding at the hands of a settler apartheid state is in some ways receiving mass support from the bourgeoisie, from the West, from journalists. Myself as a journalist for 10 years have always been aware at how absolutely biased and dehumanizing and horrible the media is when it comes to Israel and Palestine, and how they completely demolish any accuracy of Palestinian narratives. But the past 2 weeks have been new levels of journalistic lows. And I was in the doctor's office last week and CNN was on the television, and they're just spewing literal lies. They have Israelis on there crying and boo-hooing. You don't hear the word Palestinian come on the report, not one time. And so it's disgusting, it's heartbreaking, it's enraging. But I will say at the same time, especially in this last 2 or 3 days, as we've seen solidarity protests all around the world, it does feel like there's a paradigm shift taking place. I feel like we are all pushed to our wits' end just by surviving and living under capitalism and imperialism. And then to see something like this unfold with the support of our politicians, our presidents, our journalists, etc., you now have tens of thousands, really probably hundreds of thousands of people across the US, across Canada, across Africa, across North Africa and the Middle East, across Europe, coming out and protesting and marching for Palestinian solidarity in ways that feel unprecedented for me as someone who's been doing this work for a few years now. And so while I'm like disgusted because as soon as you think the colonizers can't get any worse, they prove you wrong. I do feel like in this moment we're witnessing maybe more people joining the solidarity movement than ever before. At least hopefully. That's like trying to find the optimistic thread in all of it.
Yeah, thank you both for that. I think for me, I mean, like you said, I've been following updates constantly. I was actually, I'm always up late, so I was up when all of this first started. I was like about to go to bed, and then I was on Twitter, and I saw the things that were happening, the so-called attack and all of that, and then I stayed up just watching everything, and then even though that wasn't as bad as it was going to be for things to come, I knew there was going to be the backlash, and that was going to be difficult to just live through. But I think what pisses me off for me is this issue is like one of the easiest things I think to be on the right side of, if not the easiest issue. An issue doesn't even quite get at it, but like this situation is just to me pretty clear cut. So it's always amazing to me the extent that people go to complicate it, and then tell you it's complicated. And to me it's very, very clear, one-sided. Like there's not really much nuance to be explained in regards to just what Israel is and what it's done to Palestinians. We can, I don't think it's my place to get into a debate with people about strategies and tactics. I think that's for the people involved in the actual struggle to do. But I think that should really be the only debates for people at all, is strategy and tactics about how to end like the settler colonialism. Otherwise, I don't really know why anything else is a conversation. I genuinely drives me crazy. So I've had to restrain myself from getting in arguments with people and just wasting my time on stuff like that when it's not really fruitful, because it's just like, to me, this is pretty clear. But I guess I don't consider myself some historian on this issue, but I think I have a decent enough knowledge for me that makes it clear that it's apartheid, it's occupation, it's genocide, etc. And maybe some people don't have that context. I think others do know these things and do just choose to just dismiss it. But those are not the people we're talking to today. This episode is not for the people who stand with the colonizers, especially the folks who know the history and just choose to be on the side of Zionists regardless. With that being said, just to give people some breakdown of how we got here, just a brief rundown of history. Often people jump to 1948, when this began. In the area, really began before that. But like, what was Palestine or Palestinians prior to the Israeli occupation and apartheid? Like, what? Just so people understand, this didn't start with like these people existed there before this so-called conflict, and I'm putting that in air quotes for people who can't see. Either one of you can take that.
Well, I'm not a historian, but I can start. I guess the first time that we really, from what I understand, that we first see Palestine on the map dates back 10,000 years. But this is predating the nation state. People lived in these, people had a strong affinity to their communities. The area was known as Palestine, and people identified as Palestinians for, hundreds and thousands of years before 1948. For, I believe, 400 years in the South. I feel like you're the more specific one. The Ottoman Empire ruled over Palestine and a lot of the Middle East. And then we had 30 years of British mandate. And then we had the establishment of the Zionist Israeli state in 1948. People often say Palestine has always had these rulers, and it seems like a kind of dismissive thing that people say to suggest that that this is the same. But we've never had colonizers who took people out of their homes, took over their homes, ethnically cleansed them from the land. And that's not to say that people didn't fight against the rulers that they had before. And my grandfather was wanted by the British in the 30s. And you know, his oldest son, my uncle, was born while my grandfather was in hiding. He would sneak into my grandmother's house at night, and that's how they conceived him. And the British soldiers were very shocked when she became pregnant while he was missing. Yeah. And even under the Ottoman Empire, there was, you know, peasants and farmers revolting against heavy taxation or you know, just different campaigns of the Ottoman Empire. So you can look back for a long time at the different types of resistance that existed in Palestine, but there was nothing like Zionist state's establishment. And 1948 kind of marks this, you know, it's really hard for Palestinians to think back before 1948. A lot of our collective imagination begins in that year. So whether you were born after it or before it, you tend to tell your story from that year. It's just part of this like colonial effect. So we really don't talk about it a lot, but 1948 was the year that everything turned upside down, and that's why we tended to think of then.
I think, you know, there's such a direct connection when we talk about colonialism, and you're saying Palestinians tend to start their history in 1948 as an effect of colonialism, because I'm thinking about enslavement and chattel slavery, and how similarly we're often taught, or we just adopt this view of starting our own history as Africans with enslavement as well. Mm-hmm. And how that in and of itself is an extremely intentional effect of colonialism. And I know that when it comes to the area of Palestine, it's important to know that throughout the years, throughout the centuries rather, there has been peaceful coexistence, multiple, throughout the history of this land. In the region, dating back 1,000 years, you've had as much at different points, as much as 10% Jewish population, although it has been a majority Arab and Muslim. And so you've had peaceful coexistence. You've had a people who were largely pastoralist, meaning like there's a heavy emphasis on agriculture, farming, the land. Things like olive trees take up cultural significance and importance, dating back, 1,000 years to the region. And like you said, while there has throughout this history been internal conflicts, the very notion of peaceful coexistence in the region was what completely changed as we approached 1948. The idea that there could even be peace and peaceful coexistence, quote unquote, among these different ethnic groups and religious groups was put into question and contested the moment Israel enters the picture. But prior to that, this was a generally pastoralist area full of villages where you had a wide range of cultures and history. There's a rich history of Africans, not just from North Africa, but all across the continent, coming through this exact area and region as well. You have a lot of very rich history. And so what Israel does once this Zionist project begins to take root is it takes the very conditions of peace and coexistence and throws them out the window, while simultaneously somehow being able to claim and convince people that it is the arbiter of peace itself, right? And so it's very paradoxical in that way. But it's indicative that from the founding of Israel, it's the same violence we're seeing today, right? Like what we're seeing is simply just a progression and more sophistication, more highly funded weaponry of death that was present at the very founding of the settler colony.
Thank you for that. I know the next question is about the history between the two people, but you mentioned Zionism, and I think we can get to the difference between that and Judaism later, but just for the record, again, I just want people to be clear on the terms. What is Zionism? And I don't need a very academic explanation, just something that grounds it. Like, what is Zionism? And then when we come back to 1948, how does that play into what happens in 1948? I'll go to Rana. Yeah.
So Zionism is the belief in a Jewish state in or on top of Palestine, and it necessitates the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And so we consider it a racist ideology with a very genocidal intent, whether it's, emptying the land, dominating who does remain. Zionism, they speak a lot about the demographic threat. Zionism needs to have a Jewish majority. And so they refer to Palestinians as the demographic threat, this constant threat that Palestinians are growing at a rate higher than they can bring Jews from around the world into Israel. It's kind of the founding theory or the driving force behind the state of Israel and the Nakba, which we just sort of spoke about in 1948, which was the mass ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the destruction of over 500 Palestinian towns and villages that were razed to the ground, the remaking of a map. The entire map was redrawn. I think in 48, almost 80% of the land was conquered, if you want to use that word. And 3/4 became refugees of the Palestinian population that was there before. But every town and city and river got a new name, a Hebrew name, and the map was redrawn, and Palestinians were erased in that moment. And this is all sort of linked to your question, but what is Zionism?
That was good. Thank you. Go ahead, Musa.
I was just gonna add two things. One, there's a movie called Farha that's on Netflix. It's by a Palestinian filmmaker. I would encourage everyone to go and watch that to get a insight into the early foundings of Israel. It's obviously a fictional depiction, and in fact, as hard as that movie is to watch at some points, they actually toned down the violence that actually took place in Israel's founding. But the movie depicts the weeks as this original catastrophe is unfolding. And so I would just recommend for folks who like to watch movies and things like that, check out that movie Farha on Netflix. And then, Google the names Theodore Herzl. These are some of the people who are behind this idea, who are working this idea of Zionism, who are working hand in hand with like British and Western imperialist forces. And in fact, a lot of people, including Jews, argue that Zionism itself is actually an anti-Semitic ideology, ironic enough. But they promoted this idea that the Palestinian area was a land without a people for a people without land. And, if you let that sink in a little bit and you call it a land without a people when there's a population of millions there, that means you're sowing genocide and ethnic cleansing of the native population literally into the fabrics of this ideology. And that line, a land without a people for a people without land, is still used today by Zionists all the time. They will go so far as to quite literally attempt to erase history and claim there's no such thing as Palestinians. There was never Palestinians here. This has never been their land. This is baked into the fabric of what Zionism is. So like Rana said, it's inherently racist. It's inherently ethno-nationalist, meaning that it places one ethnicity and one religion has, you know, the only state-sanctioned identity that's allowed to exist there. This is Zionism's roots. And funny enough, Zionism, before Israel was decided it would be where it is today, they wanted to put it in Uganda. They had multiple actually schemes and plans that were drawn up with popular Zionists along with British officials. The first one was to be Uganda, and then they had a plan for Kenya.
Uganda is in Africa, for those of you who don't know anything. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I hope I don't have to tell anybody.
Yeah.
You know, and there's another guy named Israel Zengwil who had this quote. I'm probably going to butcher it, but he said, if you give a country to a people without a country, it's foolish to allow it to be a country of two different peoples, is what he said. Mm-hmm. And once he comes into the picture and starts promoting ethnic exclusivity for a Jewish state, we then start to move towards the Palestinian land, because there's all of these sort of fake biblical or fake spiritual religious justifications that they're able to achieve. But in reality, you know, it's a supremacist and racist and extremely violent ideology from the get-go. You know, similar to like the US with Manifest Destiny and the way that they justify the genocide of natives and the mass enslavement of Africans to build this country. These things don't just happen out of nowhere. They have to have some kind of ideological justification for them. And so Zionism was that justification for the creation of this settler colony.
No, thanks for that. I think that's important history, just because a lot of people who don't know anything get snugged on this being about a Jewish, like this is a Jewish pursuit of self-determination, or people equate Zionism with any kind of Judaism, and don't, and that's been part of the Zionist project, was to merge all that together and make it seem like support for Israel is synonymous with supporting Jews and all that Jewish people have had to experience, you know, whether we're talking about the Holocaust or any of the other atrocities that Jewish people had to experience throughout history. And then that just becomes a rationalization for anything else that y'all already laid out, you know. And so when people enter into it, watching the news, and all of that's already in their heads often, and they probably don't even know about 1948, unfortunately. And if they do, they're told that, we don't want to get too deep into that history because we'll be here all day, but, you know, the lie that this was a UN thing that was established after World War II to help people fleeing from Germany, even though a lot of the people that ends up in what we call Israel today were not even part of, like they weren't even all part of the Holocaust. It was different immigrants from various places. And the UN didn't actually establish this. This was not the UN, you know. This was established, you know, as it was said, through conquest and through the assistance of the British. And like you said, the Zionists have been trying to talk to the British specifically for a while, prior to World War II, prior to the Holocaust, about doing this. So anybody that wants to like associate this with the Holocaust and say that this is like a gift to them or repayment or some kind of reparations for the Holocaust, that's also bullshit. You know, like, just want to make sure that's clear. That's not how it went down. So, because these things like pull on our empathy, and it makes us side with the oppressor because we have this narrative in our heads. So that's just not true. So I don't know.
I think if I could just add one more thing, because I think it's relevant for what we're witnessing today with this genocide unfolding. In 1947, the UN proposed a partition, essentially, and they said, we will take Palestine, split it in half, and create a Jewish state, and then have your Arab Muslim state. I'm simplifying it, but that's
effectively, yeah.
The Jewish individuals involved accepted this partition plan from the UN, Palestinians as well as surrounding Arab states. So not just Palestinians on the land, but you had like Jordan, Egypt, others in the area, parts of Syria, rejected it, right? They said, one, this is our land. Who are you? You're some Europeans. Stay over there. Right. Two, there were arguments made in 1947 by Arab nationalists who said the establishment of a specifically Jewish state would itself be a racist entity, and there's no way for that not to continue to create war. There's no way for that not to be laden with conflict.
Exactly.
And so then you have what they call it, the Arab, the Arab-Israeli, war or whatever. But from the get-go, what we're seeing today and have seen for 75 years, the Arab states who fought against the establishment of Israel quite literally said this is what the outcome would be. And Palestinians from the get-go rejected this deal because they said and they knew, exactly what this would be. And this was even at a time where you had standing British colonies all around the world. And they knew they didn't want to become a colonized people. Because today we view colonialism as a thing of the past, which is, as we're talking today, is clearly not true. But to be in 1947 is to see a world of partitions and colonies and regions that are dictated by European masters across the world. So you can read arguments from the Palestinians from 1947 that say what we're seeing today in 2023. They were saying this will be the trajectory. So shout out to Palestinians because they were like 100 years ahead of the curve. They knew there's nothing but conflict that could come from this.
Is there anything else that y'all would like to say on the history? If not, we can get to the current. Is there any other context you think needs to be provided for folks who may not have a clue what's happening or aren't very well informed?
History, as it's relevant to the past 2 weeks, is that this is not the first time that Israel has launched a full-scale, slaughter, assault against the Palestinian people. And in fact, the Palestinian people have a very long and rich history of resistance as well. And I think that's so important to remember. We don't have to go through all the dates and the different Nakbas and Intifadas and all of that necessarily. But people watching should know that, like Rana said in the beginning, what we're witnessing this week is simply an intensification and rapid succession of what they have been doing for 75 years. And it's a situation you might have just heard of in the past month somehow. But it's something that not only Palestinians, but quite literally the conscious world around the entire world has been speaking out against for 75 years. I don't think we need to go into specific historical dates and all that, but I do think it's important for people to really have in context that all of the claims Israel is making about killing babies and torture and all of these things, they have done some of the worst crimes against humanity possible to Palestinians for 75 years. And so that, I think, is just a little historical perspective I wanted to add.
Well, just that a lot of the statements that we've seen come out, every single person and her mother and every institution had to put out a statement. And I knew as soon as I heard the news, I was like, I'm really not looking forward to seeing what people have to say, because people love to talk about Palestine. It's on the tip of everyone's tongue and no one really knows. Not no one, but very few people really know what a Palestinian is or what, what Palestine is or what we've gone through, but everyone loves to comment on it. So one of the things I definitely noticed in all of these statements is that violence magically begins on October 7th. And it's a huge distortion of the timeline. when you talk about the Gaza Strip, half of the 2.4, I think, million people, half of them are under 18, very young population. So for folks who are about 18 years old, the siege on Gaza by land, air, and sea began 16 years ago. So for 16 years, no freedom of movement. Israel controls how many calories enter the Gaza Strip. They control what goods enter, what fuel enters. Everything is controlled. So there's no freedom of movement of any type of freedom, no freedom to eat what you want, etc. They're living in an open air prison, like a prison. It mimics these kind of carceral politics or policies. Gaza's punished collectively if anyone does something that upsets, the colonizer. Like a prison, everything is restricted in terms of what they get and what they don't get. And also like a prison, they like to test their military technology, military weapons on the people of Gaza quite regularly. And this is the 5th major assault on the Gaza Strip in the past 16 years. There was the 2008 attacks. Over 1,000 people were killed. More than 300 children were killed in 2008. In 2012, there was about a 1-week attack that killed over 150. In 2014, there was a 50-day attack that killed more than 2,000 Palestinians in Gaza. And then there was another attack in 2021 that some people might remember. But in between that, in 2018, there was this huge movement called the Great Return March. And, thousands of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, we're still just talking about Gaza, went out in unarmed protest to the kind of confrontation point with Israel, the no man's land. And they were met with sniper fire. It was, it went between 2018 and 19, 200 protesters were killed, but thousands were maimed. This was what the Great Return March was really known for, was this image of people losing their legs, people losing their eyes, people losing their arms. Like, this was what it really visually marked those years. And there just comes a point where you have to, it blows my mind that anyone can think to condemn people in Gaza. So few of us could even fathom what life is like there. But we've seen them go to unarmed protests. We've seen them try to go to the UN. We've seen them try to go to the International Criminal Court. We've seen grassroots campaigns. They've tried everything, and it's just, I don't think anyone really has any moral ability to criticize them trying everything that they can to get free.
And I think too, earlier I was listening to an organizer, Hiram Rivera, a really dope organizer. He was speaking on, he went on a Black Solidarity delegation to Palestine a few years ago. And it almost brought me to tears because he spent most of his time in the West Bank and Jerusalem, Ramallah. And he was saying that whenever he would meet Palestinians and, tell them where he's going next. I'm going to go see this site tomorrow and I'm going over here the next day. They would give him their phone numbers and be like, can you please send me pictures of these places? I am not allowed to travel there. And within their own country, they're not allowed to travel and see somewhere where they're, they've been there for generations. And so he was saying,
just a quick, small question. How far away is each region from each other? Whether we're talking about East Jerusalem, the West Bank, or Gaza, do you have a sense of distance? I don't mean an exact, down to the kilometer. I'm just saying, is it an hour away? Is it how far away are these things?
Yeah, it's really close. You can probably span the whole country, north to south. Maybe not the whole desert, but all the major cities in 4 hours, 5 hours. You could drive to Gaza in probably an hour from Jerusalem. It's really hard for us to imagine. Like my grandparents talk about, going to Baghdad on a weekend. Like the world was smaller for them. Distance was shorter for them before all the technology that we have today. These tiny, like, I lived in Ramallah. To go to Jerusalem felt like a huge, like, going to a different country, because I couldn't access Jerusalem. You have to go through something that looks like a border, but it's really 20 minutes away. It could be.
Yeah. And something could be 20 minutes away, but for a Palestinian to get there, if they're allowed to travel, or even if you're a foreigner coming to visit on a delegation or something, you could be going 30 minutes away and have to go through 3 checkpoints.
Wow.
Or you drive, but you have to drive on Arab-only roads because you can't drive on the Jewish roads. Or, there's villages and markets where you have to put up mesh fences in the sky because the Israeli settlers who live higher above, who stole all the housing up top, throw their trash on top of you and on top of the markets, right? This is like the most clear-cut definition of apartheid you could possibly imagine. And South Africans who famously experienced apartheid have said this since the get-go as well, and can confirm it. And the only reason I say all that is just like Rana said, this didn't start on October 7th. I'm speaking generally, but then within Gaza itself, the language I've seen a lot of people using the past few weeks is that it's a concentration camp. They're not allowed to leave. There's also surveillance. I think there's like the most cameras per square foot than anywhere else on Earth. All of this happening while right next door, again, 10, 15 minutes next door, across the literal apartheid walls and barriers that exist, you have a Jewish exclusive population having music festivals and doing shrooms and kibbutz and trying to live in an idyllic world that is literally predicated on these people over here remaining in that open air prison. Like this is what actually leads to something like October 7th. These things this violence doesn't just like randomly pop up. Violence is brought upon these people for 75 years. And so I really appreciate you bringing up, Rana, the specifics of what life is like in Gaza, because I don't think people can fathom me living in Atlanta, and if I want to drive 15 minutes north to Buckhead, having to go through 2 checkpoints, being stopped at a checkpoint for 7 hours, being asked why I want to go there, being shouted at, maybe even spit on or hit with a gun or something, and maybe even being told, no, not today, you need to go home. You can't. No, you need that life-saving medicine in the hospital. You need your cancer treatment. Too bad, right? And this is, there was 66 Palestinian women who were forced to give birth at checkpoints within the last 10 years because they weren't allowed to get through and go to a hospital. They were held up in checkpoints for hours, and they were forced to give birth at a checkpoint. And of those 66, around 30 of those children died because Israel neglected them and gave them no support whatsoever while they're in these. And a checkpoint is not what we might think.
It's not a toll road or something.
It's not like you're on the highway and the cop comes over and checks your ID and says you're good to go. There's different, and they look different, but it's essentially like a cage they put you in until they're ready to let you go. And you're at the discretion of this lanky, awkward 22-year-old Jewish kid with an AK-47. It's, or sometimes Ethiopian, or even Palestinian at some points at this point. We have sellouts in every culture, but thank you for mentioning that, because that context is so important.
And like part of the effect of this system, this apartheid system that they've set up, is fragmentation. So when we're talking about checkpoints, most people, unless they have no idea what that is, because they don't see Israelis, period. They're locked in. The Israelis are outside. When Palestinians in, let's say, broke out of that prison on October 7th, many of them saw Israelis for the first time in their lives. And so many of them are so young, they wouldn't have remembered. In the West Bank, we see Israelis all the time, and it's also unequal. You know, if you're in a refugee camp, if you're nearby Israeli settlements, any of the hundreds of settlements that are in the West Bank, if you're at any of these kind of contact points or, you know, small towns more than bigger cities, you're going to see Israelis all the time, and they're going to be soldiers or settlers tending to be armed. Palestinians in a major city like Ramallah, which is also the neoliberal heart of the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority, you know, considers like their government base, won't see Israelis as often. And it still happens, but it's so much less that, you know, it's creating like this really big discrepancy between the Palestinian experience. There's Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians in the West Bank. There's Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship. They make up about 20% of the Israeli population. And then there's Palestinian refugee camps in either internally or in the surrounding Arab countries, and then Palestinians in the diaspora. And all of us have these very different experiences, and the function of this system is really to fragment the experience, that people won't relate to each other, won't unite, won't work together. And there has been so much resistance to this, and it's still real. I mean, you have to recognize the fragmentation is real, but people have been fighting it. And that's why, you know, in 2021, 2 years ago, people coined that uprising, the unity uprising, because we were seeing people work together across all these factions, despite all of these divisions.
And one more point too that you made me think of, the settlers. When we were saying settlers, a large majority of these people have Brooklyn accents. A lot of them are from Calabasas, California, upstate New York, Brooklyn, parts of Europe. Like, these are not people who have some long, extenuated cultural tie to the land, like they want you to believe.
Yeah, good point.
You know, there's a famous Palestinian poet and activist, Mohammed El-Kurd. His family home of several generations had this fat man with a Brooklyn accent quite literally come in and try to steal their home, and on video says, well, if I don't steal it, someone else will.
Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
it's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, ya ammi.
This is like mass, right, across Palestine. You have settlers with American accents largely, but not exclusively. You know, I just want people to understand, like, these are not some like native Bedouin, whatever. These are gentrifiers who first off gentrified a lot of black neighborhoods. Let's put that into perspective as well. Like, you know, you gentrify, which is gentrification is kind of localized colonialism if you think about it, right? And so this pattern that like happens with people's houses and land being stolen. I mean, you even have entire farms where they come through to be spiteful and to try to incentivize and force people off their own land, where they chop down all the olive trees. They pour cement into the water wells, so you have no water in the village now. When you leave your home, they bum rush in with 10 members of their family, all from the Bronx or Brooklyn, with all their belongings, and they say finders keepers, essentially, right?
Squatters or something.
Squatter. I mean, it's the difference is most of the time when people squat, they need the housing,
right?
You know, they're squatting in actual empty houses, not where someone and their entire extended family has lived since 1912, right? So I want people listening who might be unfamiliar with this to not think that we're talking about some foreign, you know, far away culture. We're talking about people who were radicalized in synagogues in the West and told, despite them and their parents, and maybe even their grandparents in some cases, having lived in the U.S., that they somehow have a claim to this land across the world. That's who the settlers are when we talk about settlers.
I was going to add, like, I spent a few years between 2011 and 13 working with villages who were surrounded by settlements and just had some of the most horrific experiences. You know, settler attacks are a daily occurrence. If we're going to talk, you know, kind of contemporarily right now, since October 7th, they've really spiked because there's a kind of green card. Settlers can do anything that they want right now. The Israeli state is actually arming them, giving them more weapons than they already have. In the West Bank, you know, Palestinians are unarmed. There's very little armed resistance. There's nothing organized. So Palestinians are really just sitting ducks. Israeli settlements tend to take the tops of the hills. We're kind of a hilly terrain in the West Bank. They tend to take the tops of the hills, and we tend to be in the valleys. They're very, you know, literally looking down on us. And like Musa said, there's a lot of cases of, you know, around 10,000 olive trees are burned every year by settlers. They burn the land. So that really tells you what their relationship to the land is. There's a lot of villages that are experiencing really high rates of cancer or other diseases because they're being poisoned either by, you know, industrial factories being placed in their areas so that the settlers won't suffer the consequences, or garbage dumps, or really literally a lot of settlements direct their sewage into the water sources of Palestinian communities and poison, you know, not just the communities, but all of their crops. And this, you know, we've seen firsthand. And it's just like it is a very radicalized community. It's really bewildering to see little children, even with the settlers, you know, picking, like, you can walk by settlers and they'll just be like spitting at you. And it's just very bewildering to see and to understand, like, what kind of process must they have gone through to be this violent. It's difficult, but we see it in every single settler colonial context around the world, and it's definitely part of the state building that they do.
Yeah, thank you all for all of that. That was very enlightening. You know, I mean, I didn't even know all of that, especially I never really, just the question of distance. I'd never really asked anyone that, and I think that just hits because, you know, many of us are from bigger cities or lived in bigger cities where it can take an hour to go from one side of town to another, like just any given day. So to imagine that you have to go through checkpoints, which, as you said, Musa, doesn't even really quite like let people into how bad that is. Because again, it's not a toll road where you just pay $2 to get through or something, or, you know, and then to know that, like you said, people have never even gotten outside of these walls, and then what happens inside the walls on a daily. You know, I don't think people are, you know, even that aware of it. They think we're just throwing out words when we say apartheid or genocide or whatever other, and not to say those are synonymous, but they think we're just saying this is just hyperbole or something. It's like, no, I don't even sometimes know if those words go deep enough to really describe like what it actually is that's happening. This question isn't on our RSC, and I want to ask it as carefully as I can, but it's just hard to not get it. That you talked about the things that the settlers do to the Palestinians, and we're given this image that, you know, these are innocent people, quote unquote. We're given this idea that these are civilians, as if they, and this isn't to condone or condemn. I'm not even getting into that. But we're given this image that they're like not part of it. I think that when I hear like innocent and civilian, it gives me a sense that they have nothing to do with whatever the so-called conflict, again, air quotes, is. So how should we understand this concept of innocence or civilian when you, specifically what you were talking about, Rana, with the settlements and what the settlers do? How should we really understand this idea of civilian and innocence within the settler colonial context? Like, I'm really curious because it doesn't really resonate to me based on what you said with the day-to-day experiences, that those words really help explain anything.
I think that one thing people should know is that Israel has mandatory conscription, meaning adults of a certain age are required to serve in the Israeli occupation forces for a certain period. There are ways that people get out of it, of course. There are people who move from foreign areas who come, who might not, but a super high population, portion of the population of settlers are current or former Israeli occupation force members. And the reason I think that's important to keep in mind is because consider what that does to the mentality of a population. It makes you're already building on an extremist ideology, an extremist terrorist state, but it makes you even more militant in what you're doing and what you believe. And, think of like the US military, the biggest military in the world, the biggest death machine in the world. But here within the US, I believe the number is like less than 20% of the population is, or maybe it's even less than that, is actually in the military. When you look at somewhere like Israel, that number goes up to like 65, 70% of the people. And so I do think it is important to make distinctions, between so-called civilians and non-civilians. But we have to consider the actual component of who these civilians are demographically. And so, I think the West is being very intentional in how they describe individuals. Everyone in Israel is apparently a civilian, and no one in Palestine apparently is a civilian. Right. And that is by design. Like, that's not an accident. But if you travel to Israel, you'll feel like you're walking around in full IOF forces all around you. Even the 12-year-old kids are chanting death to Muslims, death to Arabs. There's videos. Abby Martin, a journalist, you can go on YouTube and search Abby Martin Israel, where she is quite literally in the metropolitan tourist area of Tel Aviv, casually walking up to random civilians of all ages, genders, backgrounds, and simply asking them the most benign, basic questions, and they're going on 5 and 10-minute rants about how they want to kill and exterminate the Arabs.
Any problem, you just go in there to give them a country, and then it's going to be a war between countries, If they're going to throw rockets, we're going to throw one big one and done.
I don't think there's any answer to it. Really? There's only one way, I would carpet bomb them.
You would carpet bomb them?
It's the only way you could deal with it. Or try to stop them a different way. It never worked.
And so, when we're talking about settlers, I come from a France Fanon background, not a Lewis Gordon type of France Fanon, if you know, but from a Walter Rodney, France Fanon, and Nkrumah, where settlers are a part of the machinery that keeps the settler state running, and they're making active decisions to settle on this land and engage in ethnic cleansing in that way. And so I'm not going to play like the condemn or non-condemn game, but I think we have to really have a critical and sophisticated lens when we talk about civilians and settlers, and actually think of who these people are and what processes of ethnic cleansing they may be a part of.
This doesn't answer directly your question, but just kind of to continue on the stream of thought. Palestinians have really worked hard to not normalize relationships with Israelis. And, the anti-normalization fight is something, all Palestinians really know about. But, from BDS to the political parties, people talk about normalization. It's this idea that you can't normalize an unequal relationship. So even if the event in question is a dinner with Israelis and Palestinians, like this is considered a normalization event, because how can we sit at the same table when we're so unequal? And, this talk of normalization goes all the way up to the state level when you're talking about relationships between states like Saudi Arabia and Israel. We saw these normalization efforts over the last few years. A lot of countries still refuse to have Israeli embassies in their country because they're refusing to normalize the relationship with the apartheid state. Just to say, like, it almost becomes like irrelevant. We can't talk about each other as equals until the system makes us equal in some way, or the system falls and we become equal again. Like, there needs to be some kind of really deep transformation of society, of the entire system, for us to be on equal footing again. And, I already mentioned that all these statements were erasing history. They're also erasing power. And they're erasing the power dynamic between Palestinians and Israelis. And, you already have said, it's one of these most clear-cut situations. It's so clear that it's difficult to explain it sometimes, because it feels like being, for me in the settler state of Canada, feels like being gaslit by society every single day. But, Israel is our occupier. Israel controls everything that we do, what we build, where we go, controls every single border. This is for us in the West Bank. We're militarily occupied over the past 56 years. But for Palestinians since 1948, have been colonized, have been controlled in some way or the other through the apartheid system, which privileges Jewish lives over Palestinian lives, which are all different religions, predominantly Muslim and Christian.
And I also, one myth that you always hear is like, well, where are these people going to go? Where are they going to go? There have been thousands of Israeli citizens who have realized their position and what they are contributing to by being there, who have renounced their citizenship and returned to the US or to the UK or other countries. You don't hear these voices a lot because they're extremely suppressed, and their entire Jewish community often will disown them for that, right? But it's not like they're, this is like an artificial argument. It's an artificial hurdle. Where will these people go? Where do they come from? Right? Yeah. I think that's the first question. Where do they come from? The second question is, where have the others who left went? These are very simple questions with very simple answers that we have throughout time seen the answer, right? Like, there's someone named Miko Peled, who's a famous former Israeli who now speaks out against the occupation. He runs an organization for Jews against the occupation. So part of that gaslighting is people, outsiders, telling Palestinians, well, now you just want to kick them out, and then they'll have nowhere for them to go. And where are they going to go? And to me, it is the most fucking stupid argument possible. Because it's like, well, they can go back to Brooklyn. They can go back to their brownstone. You know what I mean? Like, it's very, the gaslighting feeling is a weapon. That's a weapon of the colonizer, right? Like, if you have a video of a literal man with the strongest New York accent you've ever heard telling a Palestinian, well, if I don't steal your house, someone else will. How can CNN have 12 hours of debate and discussion about whatever the fuck they're talking about, when the truth is, they will tell you the truth straight up. We want this land, we're stealing it, right? And so that gaslighting feeling, I mean, and it happens to Black people too, right? Like, there's like over 1,600 to 2,200 of us killed by police here every year. And then we're still made to feel crazy, like we're doing something wrong. We're like, well, that's just what else are the police going to do? Maybe you shouldn't have done that. And you start to be like, am I the one that's
right?
Like, am I crazy? Like, but they want you to second guess yourself because it is so clear cut. Like, it's like when we say community control of the police, and they're like, well, that's how, what? They want you to feel like these things are unimaginably difficult and crazy. That, well, what's going to happen? Well, what happened to Rhodesia? What happened to apartheid South Africa? What happened to other apartheid and occupying states throughout history? Those people were forced to relinquish power. The state was handed back over to the natives. A large majority of them went back to their original country. Some stayed if they wanted to. But these aren't like historical anomalies. These are things we've witnessed in real time over the last century about a dozen times. Anyway, that was a rant, but
no, that was good. Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that, I haven't actually seen any Palestinian organization calling for every Israeli to leave. I mean, most Palestinian organizations have been saying one state, at least one state with equal rights for everyone. There have been people saying the West Bank needs to be emptied of the illegal settlements, which is a very reasonable call. And to be, the very far right, very militarized of the settlers, they tend to be the most intense. But, I tend not to get involved, like not involved, but I tend not to go too far into the, what will the future state looks like, because we have so much work to do, on the ground right now. But you can kind of say pretty briefly that a lot of Palestinians have rejected the two-state solution that is really on the tip of the tongue of a lot of international legal people ever since the days of the Oslo Accords. We've kind of seen since the Oslo Accords in 1991, 1993, what has happened in the West Bank since the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. We live under a police state that is so heavily policed. We have so many different types of security forces that's underneath the military occupation that we have from the Israelis. So Palestinians have really rejected the two-state solution. A lot of people still believe in some kind of one-state solution where we dismantle the system and rebuild something where everyone has equal rights.
Yeah, you said the Oslo Accords. Do you mind just very briefly clarifying that for people who just don't know what that is? The secret negotiation, etc.
Well, my generation is called the Oslo generation in the West Bank because we sort of grew up. I was born in 91. We kind of grew up in the aftermath of the Oslo peace accords. These were signed in the early 90s and created the Palestinian Authority, which is now run by the Fatah political party in the West Bank. We have one of the highest rates of police per capita in the West Bank because of these accords. The accords set up the West Bank into Area A, B, and C, where Area A is policed militarily and civil, military and civil policing is happening by the Palestinian Authority. And the big cities like Ramallah tend to be Area A. There's Area B, where it's Palestinian civil control and Israeli military control. And then there's Area C, which is full Israeli control. And the West Bank is split into these three areas. Hebron is its own case, the place that Musa was mentioning, where, shopkeepers have to put mesh netting because they live underneath Israeli settlers. It has its own system. But in general, Area C, they're not allowed to build. They're not allowed to have water sources. They're not allowed to really do anything because they're under full Israeli control, and they've kind of been forsaken by the Oslo Accords. A lot of those communities are either really small peasant communities, Bedouin communities, the entire Jordan Valley area C, and that's an area that is historically mostly Bedouin communities. Area B tends to be a lot of the smaller villages. and the villages that are surrounded by Israeli settlements, and they face a lot of like military presence as well. I'm trying not to get too into it, but the outcome of it has been a very fragmented experience. Even if we spoke kind of broadly about fragmentation before, Palestinians in West Bank versus Gaza, but even in the West Bank, there's a huge difference of experiences, and this fragmentation has been really effective at breaking down resistance. And of course, Palestinians have been fighting this since it happened. But we also see a lot of self-policing because the Palestinian Authority has a policy of security coordination with Israel. So what that means is that when Israel wants to arrest someone who is in Area A, they either have the Palestinian Authority arrest that person and then take him or her from them, or they just radio the Palestinian Authority police. All the police get off the road. The Israeli jeeps come in, they arrest the person. They leave, and then the police come back on the street. So, there's a very direct relationship between the Palestinian Authority and Israel. And at the same time, the PA, feeds something like 70% of families rely on PA salaries in some way. Like it's a very entrenched system. And so the effect of the Oslo Accords has been to entrench a much more, peaceful is not the right word, but it's almost like a more sustainable system than what you see in Gaza, because the violence is built into the everyday. It's very deeply rooted, and there's a lot more internal violence inside Palestinian communities. And so it takes a lot of stress off of the colonizers' shoulders. And we see this in a lot of different instances around the world.
Rana, I actually credit you all the time for really teaching me about the PA, the Palestinian Authority, as like a neo-colonial, like a puppet of the colonizer, essentially. We even recorded a whole podcast episode on it that never got released. We'll have to redo that one day, but I credit you for that and for the way that you connected it to, in some cities you might have an entirely Black police force or a majority Indigenous police force that is answering the call of the colonizer and doing essentially whatever they tell them to. And while the people might be against this force, they simultaneously rely on it in some ways. And so that is the result of the Oslo Accords. And thank you for breaking that down so well. But I do think we should also get into the current,
Yeah, I actually wanted to, because I just thought of that when we were talking. I was talking to my mom this morning. She's living in Bethlehem right now in the West Bank. And you might have heard that today Israel bombed a mosque in the West Bank, which is a lot, it's a lot rarer to see airstrikes in the West Bank. My mom was telling me that a few days ago, because we're from the Jenin area, that a few days ago, all of the Palestinian Authority agents left Jenin. And so people were saying something's about to happen in Jenin. They all left, they went to Ramallah. And so I was thinking about this right now, because they definitely had some kind of coordination. They knew that something was about to happen. And maybe the worst of it hasn't happened yet. We don't know. But after they bombed the mosque in Jenin, they went right into my village, which is Kabatia. It's like 20 minutes from Jenin. And the boys of the town all came out in confrontation with the army. They always do. They always have. Our village is really known for confronting the army when it enters. And there was a 14-year-old boy killed in the confrontations. And by confrontations, they're coming out with stones against the army, which is coming in very heavily armed. So this was the news that we woke up to today. And it really ties all these different things that we're talking about together.
Yeah, that's crazy. I hadn't heard that the PA fled the area prior, like that. That kind of blows my mind a little bit. I hadn't heard that yet.
In moments like this, where there's so much happening, things like that are not going to be reported on. And then on top of it, Palestinians are like so desperate to have an end to airstrikes right now that people by necessity are simplifying their calls. You know, they're trying to break things down so that the world can digest it, and calling attention to the Palestinian authorities' complicity makes things a lot more complicated. And so a lot of people really avoid trying to talk about that. And I think a lot of people from my generation don't want to avoid talking about it. You know, we want to talk about it because I think that as long as the Palestinian Authority is in place, it's an enormous barrier to our liberation. Like they arrest people who try to form any kind of resistance before they get anywhere. So they really are the kind of literal impediment to liberation.
Huh. Yeah, that's wild. I mean, it's also just, as an aside, it's also difficult to even get the proper news at all if you don't know the right sources. You know, if you're watching anything that's on mainstream cable or anything, we already know what they're on, let alone that level of insight. So I appreciate all that. I know we didn't intend to talk as much about what leads up to the current, but I think all of what was said was very important. I don't think any of it was a waste, especially not just the 1948 and that era, but even what's happened in our lifetimes, you know, like within the last 10, 15 years. I think that's very important information in history, and, you know, all of this all helps ground the present.
All right, that was the end of part one. Again, come back for part two. If you want to hear the entire episode before it's all the way released, you can go to our Patreon, and the audio of that is already posted. But again, this will come out just a few days after, like 2 days after this one. So we'll in that episode, we're going to get more into the present day, get into some of these myths that prevent solidarity between, you know, different groups. You know, whether it's, you know, why should Black people care about Palestine? They ain't never done nothing for us, or anything of that nature. There are a bunch of homophobes, or, you know, whatever stuff that you hear about Palestinian people. You know, we addressed that stuff as well. Didn't really feel the need to say much on that at the beginning, because I'm kind of past that point. But for those who need to hear that conversation, is important to deal with it, so we deal with that in part two. And, you know, see y'all then. But I think thanks for coming through. I know this was a heavy one. I know for people who are really engaged in this issue, I know it's a lot, and I know all of us are looking for something that we can do, you know, to contribute to some kind of positive outcome for the Palestinian people. And I know that's tough to find right now. So I hope y'all found something in this episode. Other than that, we'll see y'all next episode. Peace.
Okay, fresh out the plane in a whole nother state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told them be safe in the stay.
Hey y'all, and if you have any comments or just thoughts on episodes to come, feel free to just leave us a review and rate the show and tell us how you feel.